Thank you.
And I'm going to put up the, hold on, sure. Yes, that's the one. Let me just, okay, hold on a second. Let me just go to slideshow. Okay, we'll wait till they get it.
We're okay. We could wait a minute until everything comes up. Or fine.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
just waiting for the, I'm waiting for I'm waiting for my computer to say that, okay, you should see the PowerPoint now. Okay. Hi, everybody. Before we continue, like we said, the last 2 weeks really have been more of an introduction. Um, I couldn't help but thinking about a something of a mini news event that happened a few months ago. I Yeah, um, have it's before the war. And really have been enjoyed having this weekly item on Channel 14 with Shimon Ricklin. Oh, it was almost 2 years we've been doing it, and hopefully it'll, after things quiet down, we'll go back to it. But one of the and periodic, and so usually it's about, I tried to cover most of medieval Jewish history in 7-minute segments, which was something of a something something of a challenge. But occasionally an item hits up in the news, which I used, and this came up last summer. Um, a scholar, and there's a reason why I'm going to tell you all this. There's a scholar in at the University of Pisa who did a biography of Leonardo da Vinci, and after years and years of research, he came to the absolute conviction. Everybody sitting? That Leonardo da Vinci was Jewish, because Leonardo's mother was a slave, and this was documented. And he followed the paper trail and discovered that it did nothing. There was no smoking gun, but there was so much circumstantial evidence that it just really hung together. That apparently his mother was a Caucasian Jew from the Caucasus, in other words, who had been kidnapped by apparently Genoese merchants. Slavery was still very much a part of Renaissance Italian life. In fact, Cosimo de' Medici gave birth to a son who, from a slave girl that he had actually been gifted, who later became a major cardinal in the Catholic Church. Anyways, so this woman was actually bought by a by a merchant in Vinci.
Oh, we lost Professor Wolf again. I guess we'll wait, we'll wait for him to come back.
I just hope he noticed that he's gone.
I think no, probably is something probably happened to his computer.
Wow. Talk about building up the suspense.
Yes, be someone from the Da Vinci Code thought it was too much secrets are revealed here.
Okay, so in any case, so this slave girl was actually bought by a merchant in Vinci, whose next door neighbor was Leonardo da Vinci's father. And the father asked his next door neighbor, "Can he use the services? Can he Can he avail himself of the services of this slave girl as a babysitter?" Okay, and in the end,
Again,
I'm afraid he might need to invest in either a different computer or better internet.
yes, yes. Or maybe just wait a bit for the computer to get up because if you push it too far, then yeah.
Maybe he should even be speaking with the camera off and everything, just rather hear him than
Yeah, yeah. Just a minute.
Are that this woman is Jewish.
Okay.
Why am I mentioning this?
Okay,
Because
Professor Woolf,
the
were you
story got me to actually. Yeah,
just a minute? You were did you notice you went offline?
I was in the middle of telling you about Leonardo's mother, and there was a reason for the story.
No, but you went offline twice.
Reasoning.
Sorry? Oh, okay. So if
Yeah, I know. I
maybe
know. It's for some reason
may,
my connection collapsed.
okay. So maybe we could, I don't know, but maybe the connection is not strong enough. So maybe if you'll even be only on audio without video. So maybe we could wait until if it happens again, maybe it could go only on audio, and then the connection
Okay.
will stay
State of
safer.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, great.
Anyways, the bottom line is that what I was going to tell you was basically this. The bottom line was I was going to tell you that there were a number of cases and a number of stories where Jewish women actually and Jewish children were taken captives and held as slaves, and the Jews were unable to really there was nothing they could do to get them released. And the difference between now that we were something we can do is tangible. That was the whole that was the whole point. Okay, let me pull up the screen, the share screen. All right, so last week we were talking about we basically the last 2 weeks have been sort of like an introduction to the main event. The most interesting and the most important phase of Italian Jewish history really is starts in 1350. Up until then, I mentioned this last week. Up until then, the Jews had primarily lived in southern Italy being defined as sort of anything from Rome southward. In the late 13th century, in the late 1200s, southern Italy, except for Rome, here we see a picture. As you can see Rome here. Southern Italy was occupied by the French. And what ended up happening there with the French ruler who conquered southern Italy was the younger brother of Louis XI, known as Saint Louis, who was, among other things, a wonderful, famous king and a what my mother would call a richtiger Antisemit, a real a real full-time Jew hater. He was the one who Louis IX was the one who instigated or supported the trial of the Talmud, the burning of the Talmud, an ongoing attempt to smash and destroy the ability of Jews to make a living in Italy, who strengthens his ties with the Dominican and the Franciscan orders, whose theology, contrary to actually papal theology, led them to the position that there is no way that Jews should ever be tolerated in a Christian country because they're dangerous. They're dangerous because they ally with the devil. They're dangerous because they represent blasphemy and heresy. They foment heresy and so on and so forth. These trends were instituted in southern Italy by this younger brother of Louis IX, and actually came to fruition in southern Italy even before they did so in France itself. So that in the course of the last decade of the 13th century, Jews are persecuted, Jews are forced converted, the Torah, the Talmud is burned, and Jews are expelled. Jews are only expelled for the first time from France in 1306. So the Italian branch of the family actually was much more what's the word? What should I say? More efficient in this regard than, in fact, the original branch in France itself. In any event, so Jews start moving north. Those Jews that were not forced converted or convert to Christianity. Now, this move north starts, as I said, around 1300. but doesn't really get that far. The Jews sort of move into into the area of Rome in the center of Italy, and they sort of more or less stay there. What really changes everything is what's called the crisis of the 14th century. The European economy collapses. There are terrible famines, but of course, the thing that really the thing that really gets things going, the things that really changes everything is the Black Death. Now, the Black Death actually hits Italy before it hits any place else in Europe. The Black Death, what we now know is the bubonic plague caused by the Yersinia pestis virus. By the way, that was not really the time to go, but when what's it called, the virus was first really identified in Hong Kong, and if you go to Hong Kong to visit, there's actually a museum dedicated to the guy Yersin, who isolated the virus. And anyways, the plague arose in Central Asia at a time that the Turks were besieging an Italian city, an Italian colony on the Black Sea. There were a lot of Italian trade colonies in Central Asia as part of their sort of like international trade empire, and in the city of Kaffa, which sits on the eastern shore of the Black Sea, was besieged by Turks. The Turks decided to wage some form of what's called bacterial biological warfare. So when a number of their soldiers died from the plague, they put the bodies onto what are they called? No, we just chuck something up. What's it called? Help me. All right, the word express catapults, and catapulted the bodies into Kaffa, which was run by the Genovese. The Genovese weren't stupid, and they chucked the bodies back with their catapults, but it was too late. And one night, a bunch of Genovese merchants got on a boat and sailed away from Kaffa because Kaffa was about to fall. What people didn't know was the fact that they were actually carrying the virus. They get to Genova. They were actually kept away from the city because people started, sailors started dying from the Black Death on the boat. And the rule was that if a boat came into port and there was no possibility, and people were sick, they had to wait 40 days before they could get into before they could land. The word in Italian for 40 is quaranta, and that's where the word quarantine comes from. In any event, apparently all of the sailors died of the Black Death, and that should have saved the day, except that nobody thought about the fact that there were rats on the boat, and the rats came on shore and landed in Genoa, and from Genoa the Black Death spread between 1347 when the boat arrived in Genoa until 1350. Until 1350, something on the order between 30 and 70% of the European population died from the Black Death, and of course, it engendered all kinds of anti-Jewish riots and murders and all kinds of horrible things. Interesting, the one country that was not affected. This is one of these weird historical conundrums that to this day we have no idea why. The one kingdom that wasn't affected by the Black Death was Poland. The Black Plague never came to Poland. Now, why is that? Aside from being of arcane interest, why am I mentioning this? Because in 1344, 3 years before the Black Plague started, Casimir the Great, the Jagiellonian king, the great founder of the Polish kingdom, which ultimately ruled most of Eastern Europe at the time, within the next 100 years, started inviting Jews to leave Germany and to come to live in Poland because he wanted Jews to help to foment develop their economy. So you have this funny situation in which Jews are being, 3 years later, the Jews are being murdered wholesale for causing the Black Plague, and yet Casimir is giving the Jews a safe haven where in fact the Black Plague never came. So the Jews come, and there's no plague. It's sort of like it's sort of like sort of refuting the accusation of the rest of Christian Europe. But all right, in any event, one of the for our purposes, what's important for the Jews of Italy is that the horrible effect of the Black Death on the economy of northern Italy was that people died. So there was an incredible labor shortage. Wages, therefore, based on the laws of the rules of supply and demand, went sky high. And there was also, so you needed money to be able to pay for the labor. There are also other economic issues which are relevant for the history of Italy, but not for us. And that meant you needed money. If you need money, you also need credit. And the need for credit, the need for large, medium-sized, and small-sized enterprises, both agricultural and business, to get credit, to get money, to be able to continue to exist and to develop and to basically even subsist economically, led to the Jews being invited for the first time to come and dwell in the cities of northern Italy. Now, there was no such thing as, I think I might have mentioned this, there's no such thing as Italy until the Risorgimento, until Garibaldi in the 19th century. Italy is, as Metternich once said, is eine geographische Begriff. It's a geographic expression because it's divided into all kinds of little Städtlach, little city-states, some of which maintain their independence, some which are swallowed up by bigger states. But the point is, there's no even the smaller states that are absorbed by the bigger states all have a certain amount of autonomy, and they all need credit. They all need money. So forget about that. So the shortage of credit leads to Jews being invited into these cities. Now, the Jews of southern Italy who have been traveling north for the last 50 years or so end up they were previously in, I said, the dyeing business and so on and so forth, but it was not hard. Apparently, they had the kind of the amount of coin to be able to get involved into low level and middle level. Okay, it depends on how you want to call it. You can call it credit. You can call it loan banking, which is the word we like to use, or you can call it usury. Usury, as we'll see in a second, only means usus. In Latin, means use. So you're basically paying for the use of the money. And you pay, why do you pay for the use of the money? You pay for interest. That's what it's about. We'll get back to that in a minute. Now, usury, as we'll see in a minute in greater depth, was considered to be by the church a cardinal sin. But Jews are going to go to hell anyways. So, what's the big deal? I mean, they're going to get hell anyways. So we might as well use them for credit because all right. So it'll be 30 degrees in the shade Celsius for them. So now it'll be 40. What do I care? In any event, so the Jews are invited in to provide credit terms. Now, at the same time, all right. Now, we're going to come to now. At the same time, we're going to come back to this also a little bit later today. As it happens in the second half of the 14th century, Jews not only start moving north from southern Italy, they start moving into Italy over the Alps, both from the east and from the west. The Jews of France are expelled the first time in 1306. They are recalled in 1315. They are expelled again in 1322. I always wondered how stupid they could be to keep going back. They were expelled for the last time in 1394, forever. They are not allowed back into France until after the French Revolution. One of the more I don't know what to call it. One of the more amazing scenes in French or in Jewish history is recorded by actually French historians. Jews had not lived in France in the time of the French Revolution from 1789, 400 years. There were, however, Jews who were under French rule because they were in Alsace-Lorraine, which is that area between Germany and France, which kept going back and forth between the two all the way from the time of the Charlemagne's son, the grandchildren of Charlemagne in the 9th century. But so the Jews there who are not technically in France, they're ruled by France, but not part of France proper. After the French Revolution, when they started working on the Constitution and the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and they're screaming liberté, fraternité, whatever it is, liberté, égalité, fraternité. So apparently some guy in one of these meetings said, what about the Jews? We're talking about humanity here. Some guy says, what about the Jews? And there's like stunned silence, like never occurred to them that like the Jews would be relevant to this. And actually, it's actually the inner logic of their own rhetoric, they're up in their own rhetoric, that ended up having the Jews being admitted into France for the first time in 1400 after the fall of the Bastille. In any event, so Jews are thrown out in 1394, and they have nowhere to go. So some go to Germany, to French-speaking areas of Germany. Some go to the Papal States, which are in southern France at this point, which are not part of the French kingdom. But slowly but surely, the laws of supply and demand lead many Jews to move from southern France into northern Italy. Interestingly, the French king in 1394 was so hot to get rid of the Jews, he let them take their money with them. Usually they took away their money, but they said, no, we want to get the Jews out of here. Come here. And so the Jews are coming in with cash. So they're actually well equipped to be able to also respond to this big demand for credit. At the same time, in the 50 years after the Black Death, Jews are being persecuted and pushed and expelled from all kinds of cities in Germany. So for the same reason, Jews in Germany who've been working in loan banking or usury for so many centuries already, they move in from the east, over the Eastern Alps. So what you have is Jews from France moving in from the west into Savoy, from Savoy into the Piedmont, and then into Western Lombardy. And you have Jews from German-speaking countries in Austria moving into over the Eastern Alps into Venice. And by the way, there were many who say that actually Yiddish was born not in Poland but in Venice. The earliest things we have that are written in Yiddish are actually written in Italy. And they meet the Jews moving north from southern Italy, and they're all competing for the same economic opportunities. And as we'll see, that meeting was not always pleasant. In any event, so that's what leads a significant Jewish population for the first time to, it's hard to say flood, but to enter into northern Italy, which is where all of the Jewish action is going to start being, and it stays until today. The Jewish population of southern Italy to this day is practically non-existent, except for a small community in Palermo, in Sicily. Jews live from Rome and north. Okay, so that leads. Now, in terms of absolute numbers, over time, it's not 100% clear. We know it's pretty clear that there were never more than 50,000 Jews in Italy. That sounds odd. There were never, ever more than 50,000 Jews in Italy. Today, there were only, well, it depends on how. I asked Riccardo di Segni, the chief rabbi of Rome, how many Jews there were in Italy. He said officially there's like 12,000, 15,000, but there are like a few thousand, more than a number. There are several thousands who don't admit that they're Jewish, or they don't affiliate formally with what's called the Comunità Israelitica, the Hebrew or Hebraica, the Jewish communal structures. So maybe there were 20,000 Jews in Italy, but there were never more than 50,000. Normally there were 35,000, and they're scattered throughout the peninsula, throughout that entire area, for a very simple reason. Again, we'll come to that again in more detail in a few minutes, because of supply and demand. How many usurers do you need? I mean, nobody's absorbing Jews because they want Jews. They're absorbing Jews because they need them. So you keep them to a minimum. Okay, now, so therefore, Jews are also going to be spread out. The nature of Jewish settlement is that it's incredibly spread out. You have some major centers which can accommodate that many Jews, because we'll talk about the terms in a minute. But Jews are very, very. We'll see there were Jewish communities where there were 2 Jews, and that's a community. So it's a very lonely kind of existence. But before we get to that, I want to take a couple of minutes and just talk about usury and finance. Okay. So starting in the 12th century, starting in the 12th century, Europe ceases, actually, yeah, starting in the early 12th century, Europe becomes self-sufficient agriculturally, and there's a population growth, and the business sector begins to really grow significantly. The minute you go into business, you need seed money, you need credit to be able to, if you're gonna outfit an exhibition, not exhibition. No, when you go off someplace. But anyways, if you want to start a business, you need to take a loan. You need to buy a place, and you need to buy stuff. Even farmers also need money because sometimes they don't make enough from their crop that specific year, and they need to buy seed. I mean, there's always need for credit. The problem is that, as I said, that credit and usury was considered to be a cardinal sin. And the truth of the matter is that the way that the church understood the rules, Jews should also not be allowed to not be allowed to indulge in something so heinous as usury. So they were sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place. So they tried to actually walk a fine line between the need for Jewish usury and condemning Jewish usury by a declaration, by a canon that was accepted at the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, which was overseen by the gentleman on the left-hand side, whose name was Innocent III. As far as Jews are concerned, he was the last thing he was innocent. He was the person who really established Jew hatred and anti-Jewish legislation in Europe. He was the one who sponsored the idea of importing from the Muslims the idea that Jews should be actually wear some kind of distinguishing mark or clothing to make sure that they don't come too close to Christians. That was invented by Muslims in the 7th century in the terms of Umar, but it was adapted and imported by Innocent III. There's a company in someplace in the Midwest that makes historical little dolls. So you can get Marx and Jesus and Moses and Freud, anybody you want. And I happen to notice ones that they can also, you can't get them anymore. They stopped making them. You can have your own Innocent III action figure. So it's $25, and I really wanted one, and I wanted to actually give one to David Berger also at YU. So he said, "No, thank you. Don't send it to me. I'm not interested." And then I just couldn't bring myself to even spend $25 for Innocent III. So that was the end of that. So when it has these moments. I remember I was once in Granada leading a group tour, and I had a 3-hour layover in Granada. Now Ferdinand and Isabella are buried in Granada because that was they considered that to be the height of their achievement, that they could defeat the Moors and unite and liberate all of Spain under Catholicism. So I said, yeah, maybe I'll go see their tombs. So I waited for 2 hours, and I get to the place, and they say cost €2. And I said to myself, I'm not spending €2 for these bastards. So I ended up waiting for 2 hours for nothing. A friend of mine told me later that actually he paid the €2 because he went in, and when nobody was looking, he spat at them. All right, everybody gets their own sort of way of dealing with this. Anyways, so Innocent III, aside from giving us the Jew badge, writes as follows: the more the Christians are restrained from the practice of usury, the more they are oppressed in this matter by the treachery of the Jews. In other words, you need credit, so Christians aren't allowed to do it. So the Jews take advantage of the situation, but they have to take advantage of the situation because they need them. So the Jews are in a double bind. So in a short time, they exhaust the resources of the Christians. Now, it's true that the rates of interest that were charged by Jews were incredible. Sometimes they would come up 50, 60, 70% interest per annum. Now, the reason for that was not because of cruelty, but because it's one of these weird things. Every single era and every single society has certain obligations that they don't think are necessary to do. So, for example, when I was a kid, it was a given that you don't have to pay sales tax. I mean, you have to pay sales tax, but you go on Lower East Side and you buy a suit And the guy says, if you give me cash, then we'll sell. I won't charge you the tax. I mean, that's illegal, but nobody thought about it twice. Israelis, for example, if you've noticed, I don't know if you've ever seen this. I mean, I haven't actually traveled in a while, but if you ever noticed, I don't know, does anybody know anyone who ever, of their own volition, went to the red line coming off of collecting their bags to declare that they bought stuff abroad that might require customs? Nobody does that. I mean, I don't know anybody.
I have. Sorry, Rabbi. I've done that.
You are a
times.
tzaddik? You are a tzaddik?
No, not a tzaddik when you get caught,
Oh, no, caught
really
is something
bad.
else. No. I'm talking about of your own. No, that's when you go through the green line.
No, I've gone to the red line on my own volition a few times because, to be honest, I said if I get caught with this, they're gonna put me in jail. So,
say it again more. Then you're a tzaddik. But generally, did you ever see the way that people? Did you ever see the way our fellow Israelis go through the green line? We came up with tight hands on the handle of the cart, eyes straight ahead. You don't make eye contact with the customs agents, and you get the hell out of there as fast as humanly possible. So so we don't think about it. Pay meches, mi mishalem meches. So in the Middle Ages, there was this idea that you don't have to pay back loans. This was, by the way, something that was true both of Jews and non-Jews. The pshut, there are tshuvas of major poskim who have to deal with the question: how do we manage to get people to pay back their loans when they won't pay back their loans, even if they're gemachim? So, interestingly, you even have there's a long tradition. This popped up recently in the case of trying to get a recalcitrant husband to give a get. There is even a precedent to hold up the burial of a debtor or a member of the family until such time as the guy the member of the family pays their debts. Now, you're talking about violating an issa d'oraisa of nivla meis in order to be able to get a loan paid. But anyways, that's the reason why Jews were charging these enormous rates of interest, because you had to recoup something, and that's the only way to recoup anything. In addition, there was one of the things which came out of this statement or this rule by Innocent III was that ultimately Jews were owned. There seemed to be the serfs of the secular and ecclesiastical rulers, and therefore, basically, whatever mikasa sukasa. Whenever Jews had was sort of technically also owned by the local lord. So if the lord decided he wanted to do a favor to somebody and forgive the money he owed the Jew, you could do that. So every dime you lent there was nothing. It was absolutely nothing secure. So that's why we have the statement of exhausting the resources of the Christian. In any case, so the Pope comes in and says, wishing therefore in the matter to protect the Christians against cruel oppression, we ordain in this decree that if in the future, under any pretext, Jews extort from Christians oppressive and moderate interest, the partnership of the Christians shall be denied them till they shall have, basically we're going to boycott the Jews until they lower their interest rates. But they're allowing them to do something which, according to canon law, they're not allowed to do. Okay. Now, by the way, this ruling, which allowed for Jewish loan banking, also fed advanced Innocent III's agenda of making the Jews despised for a very simple reason. If there's anything that we don't like, it's people to whom we owe money. So therefore, having the Jews being involved here, so you're going to sort of you're going to hate the Jews. They're going to owe you money. You owe them money, good. You're going to hate them anyways. So these are the terms that the Jews are coming in to fill in Italy. This is not like we love you. This is not the National Council of Christians and Jews who are inviting Jewish settlement because we love Jews. Okay. I just want to take a quick note as to just understand why was charging money for interest? Why was charging interest for loans? Why was it considered something bad? This is not necessarily so important for us, but it's something which I think is I also see part of my mission in life is for general education. So here we'll take one slide to explain it. Guy on the left is Thomas Aquinas, who actually formulated as the great Christian scholastic, who is known to have ripped off Maimonides. extensively in his major work, the theological Summa Theologiae. Actually, it's a funny. I have to share this story. During Corona, I was invited to give a talk. I have a very dear, really a very dear friend, who is a Catholic theologian and economic historian, whose name is Dr. Samuel Gregg, and he was attached to the Acton Institute, which is a Catholic think tank, international Catholic think tank, for many years. He's now elsewhere. And anyways, he published a book called Faith and Reason. And he asked if I would speak at the book launch, which was held in Rome. I said, of course. Of course, it was during Corona, so I gave my talk from where I'm sitting right this minute. I was wearing shorts, sandals, jacket, and tie, which was always very cool. And anyways, so I ended up giving my presentation, and one of the priests who was actually in Rome at the time says to me, that's really incredible what you said, because Aquinas says exactly that. And it took every bit of self-restraint I had not to come back and say, yeah, because he ripped off Maimonides without citation. But anyways, so this is Aquinas. In any event, Aquinas deals with this question of usury. So that's what I want to just sort of like share with you. So why shouldn't you charge money if you give a loan? So first of all, the major reason, and Aquinas was an Aristotelian, is that money, coin, metal is sterile. You can plant money in the ground all day long, nothing's going to grow. And since money by definition is sterile, therefore it can't produce fruits, which would be the interest. Therefore, charging money for money is an unnatural act because it's sterile. So therefore, any profit from a loan is an unnatural act. Okay. So therefore, and that's why we'll see. I don't know if I put this here or not. Oh yeah, okay, later. So it was Aquinas, however, who said it's not that simple. He says, let's look at it this way. He said there's two ways to look at charging for so money is not, so Aquinas added, it's true that money is sterile, but money is also a consumable, a commodity. What does he mean? He means if you give me, okay, so there's no checks yet. Checks only get invented like 100 years later. So there are no letters of credit. If I lend you $5, okay, if I lend you 50 shekel, okay, good. So I'll give you a 50 shekel note, okay, and you'll give me back a 50 shekel note. But what is that 50 shekel note you give back? What is that for? So according to Aquinas, money is a consumable commodity. It's like I go into it's as if I were to go into a kiosk and I say, I want a Diet Cola. He gives me the Diet Cola. I give him 10 shekel. The transaction is finished. He can't then come to me and say, pay me again. No, I paid 10 shekel for the soda. I drank the soda and goodbye. That's the end. Finished. The same thing over here. I give you money. You spend the money. That's the equivalent of drinking the soda. And I pay you, and I pay what it's worth, and that's it. Finished. To demand money for the money is actually double dipping. It's theft. It's theft. And that's how. So money is both sterile and it's also consumable. By the way, this is not the same thing, but it's similar to it's certainly in the same area of there's a machlokas. There's a machlokas in Shas. When you give if a guy borrows money from you, is the money considered to have been spent already the minute it hits his hand? That's milva lo tzanitna or milva la lo tzanitna. When you give the money to the lender, to the borrower, is as if it's already spent. Okay, because it's something of this idea of it being a consumable commodity. All right. And to do that, to either you expect fruits of something which is sterile, or to double dip are unnatural acts. And that's why one of my favorite authors, what's his name? Dante Alighieri, who's I don't have the camera on, but whose bust is sitting on top of my on the little shelf off of my desk. In the Inferno, in Canto number 12, okay, when he discusses usurers, puts usurers together with sodomites, with homosexuals. Why? Because A, it's an unnatural, as far as he's concerned, it's an unnatural act, and B, it's sterile because two homosexual men can't make a baby the same way that money can't produce money. Okay. What ends up changing is so that's why usury is prohibited, and the Jews basically are allowed to do it because they're going to go to hell anyways. What changed? I mean, later on the attitude changed because later philosophers began to look at money not as a consumable but as a service, and to basically compare the use of money not as a consumable, but rather as what's called usus, pure use. In other words, it's as if you were renting the money. So in other words, you give me $100 or you give me 100 shekel, and it's not that the 100 shekel produces something, but it's like I rent the car. What happens when I rent the car? I rent the car for X amount of money. I use the car and I return the car. So the guy who runs the car rental agency, he both gets back the car and he gets money because I'm paying not for the thing itself, but for the time involved. Okay. In any event, okay. In any event, so that's just sort of a side thing because it's important to realize. So Jews getting involved in this business was a very, very serious. It had tremendous consequences. On the one hand, it meant that Jews were desired. It meant that they could probably get a good deal in terms of their settlement, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it also meant that they're going into something which is considered to be an unnatural act, comparable to homosexuality. And the Dominican and Franciscan friars who used to do, kinase hitorut throughout Italy never failed to mention the connection. Number two, it was something which causes people to hate you. And number three, it could also be exploitative. All right. So we're not going in. So Jews they're filling a need. The cities want them. All these little dots on this map have Jews in them, but it's a very functional kind of arrangement. But nevertheless, the need is palpable, and economic need overrides any other considerations, at least in the beginning. And as we'll see in a second, the terms that cities, large and small, are willing to give Jews to come settle and fill this commercial need are often much better than anybody in the church would ever want. Okay. And who are the people that come? As they say, there are four major migrations of Jews over the course, starting from 1350 until 1500, of Jews into the peninsula. They move north. The Italiani, the original Italian Jews, move north. The Jews from France move southeast out of France and into this area here of Piedmont and Savoy on the Italian side of the Alps in the west. Germans move in from the east, and then from the second half of the 15th century on, and certainly after the expulsion, Jews from Spanish and Portuguese Jews who are expelled or run away from the Inquisition after the expulsion start arriving in the peninsula as well. The internal story of the history of Judaism in northern Italy from this time is going to be, to a significant degree, how do Jews from different traditions, and here the French and the French and the Germans are two part of Ashkenazi culture, but still they're very different. How do they get along? And the answer is they don't get along. That's the minig, right? The minig is to have a machlokas. But nevertheless, they have to somehow They have to somehow get along, and we'll see. That's going to be this part of the story. And the large story I'm anticipating, we're going to see in a little bit, and see next week, is that basically the Italiani and the Tsarfatim and the Ashken and the Germanim, they come together and they figure out a way to get along. The Spanish Jews, forget it. They consider themselves the aristocrats. They want nothing to do with these low life Ashkenazim, with these inferior Ashkenazim, and therefore they settle on their own. In Venice, for example, they settled in their own little area of the ghetto. First ghetto was 1516. They said that's why that's one of the reasons why there's a separate Spagnoli. That's the one you daven in when you go to Venice, but shul. But the most incredible example of Sephardi superiority is in the city of Ancona. I'm sorry, in the city of Livorno, which is an Ir Ve'em B'Yisrael, which until the Spanish and Portuguese Jews were never allowed there. But the Livornese decide that they want Jews to live there, and they want Spanish and Portuguese Jews because they're well connected, and they're connected with the Ottoman Empire and this and that and the other thing. And the Spanish and Portuguese Jews say, we would love to come. We make one condition. What's the condition? No Ashkenazim are allowed in. If you want to get a sense of what's called the Samach Tetiut here, it's a wonderful, wonderful series. And both series are now on Netflix. Go binge. We need binge anyways from what's going on. Watch Malkat Yofi Shel Yerushalayim, the beauty queen of Jerusalem. The major characters are all, Sephardi, Spanish, Portuguese Jews, and you see what their attitude towards Ashkenazim is, and this is basically another factor. But also, by the way, this meeting of the communities is important for us for another reason, and that is this is the first real meeting of the exiles in Jewish history. It's the first time that after 1,300 years after the destruction of the temple, that Jews who had developed their own civilizations, unique civilizations in different places, come and find themselves having to deal with each other. And how are they going to, when they have different halachic traditions and different liturgical traditions? And we all know that if this guy does this minig and shul and the other one doesn't, that can lead to more, that doesn't lead to a good place, generally speaking. This idea that they have it, for example, in Malay Dumim, where everybody says their own piyutim, this is a postmodern phenomenon, which is a tribute to Reb Chaim Sabato and Rabbi Yitzchak Shilat, who organized it. But it's certainly, or the pickup minyan idea that whoever goes to daven for the Amid, he fixed the nusach. This is a very recent business. Okay, so that's one of the things we're going to have to keep an eye on. Is this a lot of the things that we see here predict and also indicate alternatives to how different Jewish communities who find themselves sort of thrown together can try to find some kind of modus vivendi. Okay, so what were the conditions of settlement? In other words, Jews. One of the interesting differences between the Jews of Italy and everybody else throughout Europe and the Muslim world is the fact that, as I said, there was no tradition of Jewish residence in northern Italy. Why is that important? It's important because, under Islam, Jews are allowed to live under Islam as long as they observe the rules of the dhimma, of the protective rules that are laid out by Omar ibn al-Khattab. So the Jews really didn't have to justify their very existence in the Muslim world as long as they basically followed the rules. In Christian Europe, there were also legal sort of improvised legal precedents for Jews to live in all kinds of different places based on charters. However, and one of those, and already from the earliest evidence of Jewish residents in France and Germany and England and northern Spain and later in Poland and so on, was that Jews were given total autonomy to run their lives as they wished. Okay, and those were based on charters that were given and recycled and so on and so on. Okay. Northern Italy was different. There was no tradition of residence, so the existence of Jews was not a given. In other words, the first thing that the cities and the towns that invited Jews in had to do was to justify the very residence of the Jews in the city. It wasn't just the conditions of settlement, it was the reality of settlement. Again, in the rest of Christian Europe, if Jews were allowed there, it was a given that you could live there. Questions, what were the terms? Here, there was no given. So it's a chiddush already that Jews, you have to actually legislate permission for Jews to actually live here. Okay. So how does that work? What happens, what generally happens is that if you have a group of the cities will approach a wealthy Jew or a Jew of some means, or they will approach a city which seems to need their services. And the rulers of the city, whoever they are, will negotiate with this individual or group of individuals as to the terms of residence, and they will sign a contract known as a condotta. A condotta just means contract in Italian. It's an ad hoc contract. It is never, ever permanent. Okay. Generally, a condotta between a Jew and who brings his family. Maybe he'll bring some Jews who, maybe a rabbi to teach his kids. Maybe he'll bring a shoemaker, whatever it is. But generally, it's done between the sort of the rich oligarchical Jews and the community and the city. And these condotte, the plural is condotte. These condotte are they're always short term. They're always short term, between 2 and 10 years. Okay, they're renewable, but there's absolutely no obligation on the part of the local city to renew them. And in addition, often happened, that there is a 24 hour or a month escape clause. In other words, the city has the right under any given the certain amount of whatever notices is in the condotta to cancel the condotta, which means that what you think is a 1 year, 2 year, 10-year contract is really a 24-hour or 1 month contract, or maybe 3 month contract. So, in other words, Jews are always there's a tremendous sense of instability and insecurity to Jewish life. Now, this has a lot of serious practical implications for the Jews. So, for example, all right, there are practically no synagogue buildings erected in northern Italy until the establishment of the ghettos. Because it ain't worth it. It's just not worth it. Why invest in a shul if they're going to throw you out of the city tomorrow? So what ends up happening is the same wealthy. I'm taking. I'll give you one example, because there are so many variations in how this worked. In the city of Pisa, in the early 15th century, there was a friend of Cosimo de' Medici whose name is Yechiel da Pisa. It's a wealthy Jew, and he lived in Pisa. His house is still his house is a 5-minute walk from the tower, and you can still see it. It's a beautiful palazzo, what Italians call a palazzo. And in the front is now it's divided into apartments, but in the front is this big courtyard area, and we know that that's where it was understood that the richest Jew in town would take one of the biggest room in his house, and he'd give it to the other Jews that that's where they would daven. So he would daven in his house, his own private chapel, because it's not worth it. Okay. Similarly, there are no mikvahs built in Italy until the 16th century. because everybody knows whoever contributed to the building of a mikveh, it costs a fortune. It's a very big capital investment. So you don't do it because you might get kicked out tomorrow. Now, the question is, what does that mean? What does that, what indicate, what is that, what is that an indication of anything? So there are historians, there's a school of historiography that we'll get to, which maintains that Italian Jews weren't so frum. Yeah, they weren't that frum. How do you know they weren't so frum? Because one thing, they drank non-kosher wine. That's true. We'll maybe get to that a little later. But also there's no mikvahs. So the women didn't go to mikvah. So you see, this is Italians, and they like to have, relations, and who wants any restrictions? We're going to be, Italians, right? Dolce vita. When I first encountered this school of interpretation, I couldn't imagine these guys were such idiots. Because all you have to do, I wrote my doctorate about an Italian Post, like in the 15th century, but you don't need him just for this. All you have to do is open any collection of Italian Italian Chuvas written in the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century. It doesn't matter when, 14th and 15th century, okay? And you see that one of the leading questions is, what is the definition of a body of water which you can use as a mikveh? Can you use a well? Can you use a fountain? Can you use a spring? What about a river? What about sneas? If the Italian version of Bubby going in Siberia, making a hole in the ice to be able to go to mikveh, to be tovel, is the question of using the Arno or the Po or the Tiber or one of the other rivers for tefillah. So you see that the shaila was there, that women were going to mikvahs. It wasn't worth it for them to build mikvahs. So, but this has a big impact on the way you're going to live your life. Because, by the way, this also means, just to put in may try to put this into real life terms. The rivers in Italy are freezing cold. The only time that they're tolerable is from late spring to early fall. So we have real reason to think that actually most women only went to mikveh in the late spring and the early fall, because it just was not possible to go you'd get frostbite if you went into these rivers. Never mind going further north into areas like Friuli, where it's absolutely impossible. Unfortunately, we don't have Mila books. I wish if we had real Mila books from the 14th, 15th century, then we could see that if all the women are going to mikveh in the late spring, early fall, that means that all the brisin are going to be in the late fall and early up to the early spring, right? Because it takes 9 months still to hatch a baby. So if we're going to have a bris, so the Moelim would actually write, that they actually would give the dates. We don't have any, but you're talking about the terms of residence actually impact this type of stuff as well. You never would have thought that the terms of residence, in terms of living and trying to find a living, would affect the definition of your sex life. But that's what happened. Okay. In addition, just sort of screwy kind of tolerance. Legally speaking, okay, in Northern Europe, when Jews got these privileges and the government told them they can run their own lives and so on and so forth, there was a given that the Jews can't be part of the feudal system because it's all Christian and so on. So they have their own rules. In Italy, it was a little bit different. Why do I write here citizenship limited? Oh, and I'll stop in a minute. I'm just getting carried away. In the year 222, the Emperor, 212. In the year 212, Emperor Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to every non-enslaved person resident in the Roman Empire. Okay, not just Romans, everybody became citizens. Now, this was not an act of tolerance, because what Caracalla wanted was to start charging everybody certain taxes that were only paid by citizens. But it stayed on the books that everybody resident in the Roman Empire, including the Jews, were citizens. Okay, and we're talking about Italy, which has a vestige of Roman law which never really goes away. So Italian law still viewed Jews to a certain degree, even though there's no given right of them to live in the cities. If they're all going to live there, they're citizens. Why is that? What is that? What? How does that find expression? It meant that the cities could not or would not grant the Jews, Italian Jews, the kind of autonomy which Jews everywhere else had. In other words, everywhere else in the world, part of the terms of settlement of Jews was that Jews can run their lives and their communities according to the Torah. You know, if you have a suit, or you have some kind of whatever, but the Bezdin decides based on halacha. It says that almost explicitly in these charters. The cities of Italy couldn't do that because the Jews are technically citizens. Since they're technically citizens, we can't allow them to run their lives according to Jewish law because they have to live according to non-Jewish law, but according to Christian law. But the Jews didn't want to do that because A, Christian law was not exactly that sophisticated, and B, it's also to bring your case to a Christian court if you can bring it to a Bezdin. So what did they do? So in most cases of civil law, they basically created a very extensive system of arbitration. What would happen was Jews convened Batei Din throughout northern Italy, and there's a very rich literature of civil litigation that was created by Italian rabbis in the period. And they would adjudicate the case, and then after the Bezdin but before the adjudication, the Bezdin would have the parties sign an agreement of arbitration in Italian, which then they would bring to the communal notary, not to the communal, I mean the Jewish community, to the city notary, and register it as an act of arbitration, which was then recognized by the city, and that made it enforceable. So Jews had to go through this whole Haggadah in order to be able to continue living according to the Torah. And they actually, obviously there were some Jews who tried to do an end run around the Bezdin if they thought they were going to lose, and so whatever. But in general, there was a tremendous amount of Mesiras Nefesh on their part to make sure that they continued to live according to the Torah, while at the same time using the this arbitration loophole in Italian civil law to be able to get their decisions backed by the government. Okay, we talk about citizens mikvaot, and we will stop there. Next time we will continue and talk about how Jews didn't get along with each other. But that'll be it for now. Are there any questions?
I think
yes. One quick question. About a week ago, there was I saw in the news that some minister, I don't know what exactly the capacity was, from Italy, said that they decided to give to Israel, back to Israel, the Klei HaMikdash. Have you heard about anything about that?
Yeah, I saw that. All right, let me. Okay, so that's also known as, what does the Vatican have in the basement? Look it. We know that the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash were taken prisoner and brought to Rome, because we see it all in the Arch of Titus. By the way, if you want to see something really cool, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Steve Fine, who teaches Jewish art at YU, discovered that actually the Arch of Titus had been painted. So, and he was able to do CGI based on what they found to see what actually originally looked like. And all you have to do is write down Arch of Titus colored in Google, and you'll see what it originally looked like when it was painted. So we know that was. We also know from both Jewish and non-Jewish sources that the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash were kept in what's called the Templum Pacis, the Temple of Peace, which was at the edge of the Roman Forum. In fact, when was I last in Rome? A year ago. So it's as of a year ago, they were still excavating. They had taken a long time to get to it. On not far from the Capitoline Hill. It's a 5-minute walk from the ghetto, by the way, from the Portico d'Ottavia. And we know that Rabbi Shimba Yochai says that he saw the base of the menorah, for example, in that temple. Okay, that Adkan. In the 5th century, in the 400s, Rome was looted a couple of times. One of the times was looted by a Germanic tribe called the Vandals, and we get the word vandalism from them. And according to the historians that we have, or the chronicles that we have, the Vandals took the menorah and brought it to their kingdom in North Africa. About 100 years later, about 100 years later, the Emperor Justinian, now in 476, the Western Empire fell apart. No more Western Empire. Everything's divided into little Germanic kingdoms. But the Eastern Empire, what's later called the Byzantine Empire, is still very much functioning. By the way, people realize that Rome only fell in 1453. That's the end of Rome. Okay, so we don't think about the fact that like Christopher Columbus was alive when the Roman Empire was still around. In any case, the Emperor Justinian tried to reconstitute as much as possible the Roman Empire and conquered southern Italy and Spain, much of Spain and North Africa. And according to one of the chroniclers, Belisarius found the menorah and brought it back to Istanbul. Or not Istanbul, it's Constantinople. By the way, Istanbul only means in the city. So it's like you're going to New York, I'm going to the city. So that's what Istanbul means. It's a sort of like indirect reference to Constantinople. But according to this historian, when Belisarius brought the menorah to Constantinople, the patriarch of Constantinople, so like the Pope, but he's like on a little lower level, said the candelabrum doesn't belong in Istanbul and Constantinople, it belongs in Jerusalem. So I'm going to send it to Jerusalem. Okay. End of paper trail. If he did that, it means that the menorah is not in the basement of the Vatican. It means it's somewhere here. Now, Steve Fine, and he's probably right, Steve Fine is convinced that this is ridiculous, that the thing was made of gold. No question, and nobody had any like Yiras Shamayim as far as that's concerned. They probably melted it down and used it for the gold because you do all kinds, that's what you do. Is it possible that the Pope has stuff from the base of Mikdash? Yeah, it's possible. I think it's possible. Because don't forget that the papacy, the church began to fill governmental functions in Italy and throughout Europe as Roman government collapsed in the 300s already, even before the Roman government, finally sort of like implodes. I don't know. Maybe.
No, but
maybe
this is not supposedly.
But the guy from the Italian Senate would have absolutely no idea what's in the basement. Okay, because don't forget the papacy, the Vatican is an independent state. It has its own money. It prints its own stamps.
So the Italian government has no
nothing. Garnishment.
They can go in and take what they need.
No. Absolutely not. The Vatican is one of the smallest countries in the world. I don't remember if it's smaller than San Marino, which is another one of these anomalies in Italy. But the Vatican area is a sovereign state. They have their own army. The Italians cannot do that. And in fact, the truth of the matter is, even the Nazis didn't dare. I mean, they didn't need to because the Vatican cooperated. But the Nazis at one point, Hitler wanted to send the SS and the German army into the Vatican, and they told him you can't do that because there was a concordat between the Vatican and as a sovereign state and the German government that was signed in 1935 by the guy who later became Pope Pius XII, the Ymach Shemo V'Zich. Okay, we will continue.
Thank you.
Down to 5 people.
Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.
And we'll meet again next week, B'ezrat Hashem. Thank you. Please, for God. Fascinating.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye.